This is Brooke Hudson, and I am the producer of Omaha Fashion Week. I see a lot of familiar faces on the call. We are going to go ahead and get started. There's still people coming into the meeting. I think some people were having a hard time getting the link, but yeah, so I think we're just going to go ahead and get started. We're super excited to have James Scully here with us tonight. He is a longtime casting director in the industry and has had production experience. He's done all kinds of things. And most recently, he's been named by Vogue as one of the fashion industry's whistleblowers. And so he's got a really interesting story about kind of what he's been doing in recent years to advocate for models. And so we're going to go ahead and let him take about the next 20 minutes to share his story. And then I'll start by asking him some questions. And then if you all have questions you want to ask him, you can actually just type those into the chat and we'll run through those. But just be kind of thinking about that as he's speaking, what you might want to ask him, because he is just a wealth of knowledge and experience that I think you're all going to benefit from. So with that, I will turn it over to James.
Okay, can everyone, I can't see myself or anything, so I gotta just make sure that everyone can see and hear me.
Your camera's not on, but we can hear you.
Let me throw, hold on. There we go. Sorry, I apologize to my dark room. So I mean, how would you like me to start, or how would you? Is there anything?
Oh gosh, yes. Can you just start from the very beginning? Actually, you start with like what you went like what initially got you interested in the fashion industry and like your college experience, because you really demonstrated a lot of initiative in college with some of the choices you made, classes versus going to a fashion show. And I'd start there. I think that's really interesting.
Okay. Well, I always wanted to work in fashion. Although I took a long time to apply to schools. So towards the end, I actually was a little late in getting all my applications out. And I had made a choice to go to some other schools and then decided probably towards the end of my senior year that I really was just going to go to New York and go to fashion college. So I was too late for FIT and for Parsons. And then there's the school I ended up going to, which is Laboratory Institute of Merchandising, which is a famous retailing college, because I actually wanted to be, at the time, I wanted to be a fashion buyer. So they basically accepted students. They had basically a contest. They would do a series of interviews, and they would give one person a full scholarship based on the interview, and it didn't matter your grades or anything. So you could just come in and talk your way into a full scholarship. And I found out like 2 weeks after I'd gone in, I'd actually gotten the scholarship. So so basically I packed my bags and moved to New York. And the first day of classes, I was looking at the bulletin board, which basically was for roommates and jobs. And I saw that there was a fashion show going on at Bergdorf Goodman, and they needed people to go in as dressers. And so I cut class, and I basically, I showed up at Bergdorf's and just went backstage and asked what it was. I had no idea what it was or what they were doing. I just heard fashion show, so I thought I'd go. And it turned out to be Karl Lagerfeld's first collection for Chanel. So that literally from that minute, I was basically bitten by the fashion show bug. So I knew that that was definitely something I wanted to do. And after the show, I asked the producers, who were a big fashion public relations company at the time, if I could freelance for them. And they said yes. And at the time, the name of the agency was Christina Gottfried and Loving. And in the early 80s, they basically, they did every show in New York. I mean, they did Calvin Klein, Perry Ellis, Ralph Lauren, Adrian Benedini. I mean, they just did pretty much every show that was to be done in New York, they did. And I basically worked my way through school by freelancing for them during show seasons. And after that, I finished school, and can't even remember my first job anymore at this point. There was, excuse me, even though I was working for them and I was in school, there was a particular boutique that doesn't exist anymore in New York called Charivari. And at the time, they were probably one of the most important boutiques in America. They were the first company to carry all of the Japanese. They were the first company to carry Armani. They were the first store to carry all the Belgians. So the first in America to carry Martin Margiela and Dries Van Noten and de Muhlmeister. I wanted to work for them, and I probably applied 6 or 7 times, and they hired me as a salesperson in one of their stores. And within a few months, I basically asked the display director if I could work for him, because I became really interested in display. I didn't want to sell anymore. And he hired me, and then I would say I worked for him for about a year. And part of the job of display, besides doing windows, is because we had 6 boutiques and they were small stores. We would merchandise the stores when all the new collections would come in. And so he put me in charge of the merchandising while he did the windows. We would go in the middle of the night and do all the windows and merchandising. So when everyone came in the morning, it would all be ready. And the owner walked in one day and asked who had merchandised the store that she'd been standing in. And I told her that it was me, and she thought I did a great job. So she definitely said she wanted me merchandising all the stores. And then about, I would say within 6 months, she actually asked me if I wanted to work for her. And the company was a family company. It was a mother, son, and daughter. And her markets were basically London and Paris in the early 80s. So I worked with her for 8 years as a buyer, which I was shocked, because at the time she hired me, I was only 21 years old. So I was really young and going to Europe, and an amazing time. And after, I worked for 8 years. I loved my job, but then all of a sudden, after going to fashion shows for so many years, I started to feel like I wanted to be backstage again. And excuse me. And we had a PR company that handled our public relations, and they were a big fashion show production company. And I actually left Charivari to go work for him, and his name was Kevin Cryer. And basically, same thing, produced the first show I ever produced for him and with him was for Todd Oldham, and he became one of my clients within the company. And then I would say in the first year of my working for him, Tom Ford had just gone to Gucci, and he called because he knew us both, and he called and asked if we would be interested in working on those shows. And pretty much we worked on the first show, and the rest of that was history. And I basically worked with Tom Ford from his very first show, Gucci, Saint Laurent, and Tom Ford, all the way until 2 years ago, when I decided to take a break from the business. So there was, after that, I mean, my boss folded his company, and he decided that he didn't want to do that anymore. And a lot of the clients that worked with him, that I did production for, basically asked me to come and work for them. So when I started my own company, my clients were Tom Ford and Stella McCartney, Derek Lam. I started with like 5 people. Nina Ricci. Gosh, basically those were the first 5 people. And Carolina, I think I said Carolina Herrera. And they were basically the first 5 people that asked me to work with them. And I literally, for about 15 years, for the first 10 of that was a fashion show producer and casting director. And then I would say for the last 5 years, there was more money in casting. So I just went directly into casting. So that's basically sort of the history of how I wound up. And oh, actually, I forgot, in between, before Kevin Cryer folded his company, I was hired by Harper's Bazaar to be the bookings editor in 99. So I was there from 99 to 2002. And I was actually still casting fashion shows while I was working as the bookings editor. So when I was there, I basically produced all the covers and all the inside, they call the well, which is the inside pages of the magazine. And for me, that job was it was too intense. So I liked it for the minute that I did it. But then after that, I took about 2 years off. And then I came back into the business. And that's when I just formed my own company completely. And that's when those people hired me. And I basically worked for all of them until 2 years ago.
Okay, great. So, and then from when you after you were, until 2 years ago, sorry, words are hard. You also then went on this kind of interesting journey where you started calling out folks in the industry for different things. And so I want to kind of dive into that and find out from you what that was like, what triggered it, and the outcome of it. So give us the good, the bad, and the ugly of all that.
So now I was in business for myself, and I would say kind of in the early 2000s, the fashion business, and especially the fashion show business, was an incredibly diverse business until around the early 2000s, when most American magazines started to hire editors and chiefs that were no longer American. So basically, Vogue, Bazaar, Elle, Marie Claire, which were the big ones at the time, Mademoiselle, a lot of magazines that don't even exist anymore. All of those magazines were now British editors in chiefs, who then basically bought mostly British staffs, and a lot of people also bought a lot of editors and stylists from France. And basically what happened was, because the way the magazines worked then, there was no real conversation about diversity. And since most of especially the British people, mostly grew up in London, where there was, race was very divided. In London, it was really super segregated as far as the division of people there. So since most of the magazine editors came to America and they didn't ever really work with Black people, or well, it was Black, Asian, Hispanic. They didn't work with them. They didn't shoot with them. They just weren't part of their daily lives. They just never made the assumption that they should be represented in the magazines. And a lot of these editors went from working for these magazines to being stylists on fashion shows. So then all of a sudden, I would say, kind of from like the early 90s to the end of the 90s, the runways just became completely white. And then the next phase of that was, there used to be a real age limit for models. You used to, if you started young, you were basically groomed. And during high school, you were allowed to work in the summer, but you were never really allowed to work full time until you were 18. And then when you were 18, you really came into the business. So it was a very protected way to work and start your career, because you had many years to groom before you really became a huge success. And then what happened was, in that time frame, the Russia, Eastern Europe, and Brazil became huge hotspots for models to come from. And at that point, the age limit kind of went out the window. And when most models were really starting at 18 and then going on to careers that were later, most of the models were now starting anywhere between 13 and 15. And that started a big problem, because this whole aesthetic of really, really young and very, very skinny and models that were too young really started to flood the runways. And the problem then became that as these models were going through puberty, most of the editors made them feel bad for going through puberty, and a lot of them tried to do really dangerous things to keep themselves from basically becoming women. So as that started to happen, I watched the business basically go from being this very adult and diverse world to a very abusive, a very abusive system that had no diversity whatsoever. And I basically started to make a point of these things in public. And it was a little pre-social media, but then once Facebook and especially Instagram came along, I started to become very vocal about it. And then I would say in the early 2000s as well, Beth Ann Hardison, who is a great friend and mentor of mine, started the Black Girls Coalition. And she really started to call out diversity, and she went as far as to, we developed a list of every show in America and Europe, and basically said how many, if any, models of color were in those shows. And for like 2 years, there weren't. And then that started kind of the ball rolling about why we weren't diverse and what was going on in the industry. But at the same time, the business also again became so abusive to teenage models that and there were at the time, I would say, about 6 really powerful editors who really kind of had the lock on this abuse. And it started to make my job difficult. It started to make the industry difficult. And really, it was just, I personally felt that you cannot ask a child to do an adult's job and then discard them for not understanding why they were doing the job right, but all of a sudden they went through puberty and now they were no longer useful to the business. And it was happening so fast that that basically 3 years ago, actually not 3, I think it was 5 years ago now, I went on the Business of Fashion on one of their, they do a forum every year, and this was the first one. And I basically spoke out and I told the stories of all of these people and of all of these models, but I didn't attach any names to them. And I basically said that if this continued, I was going to attach names to the stories, which really made people very nervous. And then 2 months later, we went to Paris, and one of the big offenders did basically, they did a casting for Balenciaga, and they had 300 girls show up at once, and they basically locked them in a room and turned the lights off and left them in there for 5 hours. And the girls all started to text me from that casting. And then I basically went on Instagram and said who they were and said what they did and said who all their clients were and blast that out. And that just went around the world in like 5 minutes. And basically they were fired. They were basically fired from all their clients. I guess it was kind of really one of the first call outs. And it was early in the days of Instagram. So I was really shocked how fast that went around. But the thing that I wanted to achieve from talking at BOF was that I really, LVMH and Kering, who basically have all of these brands that were employing all of these people that were the most abusive, I felt like they had to do something in order to protect the models. And once I did that, and I called all of those companies out as well, Antoine Arnault and excuse me, Bernard Arnault, basically both met with me and asked what I wanted, because they basically said now that I'd done that, I was holding a lot of power cards and that I could really either do something very good with that information or just continue to bring people down. So basically I told them, as these 2 big companies, I wanted to get them in a room and come up with a document that basically would protect all of the models and basically say that the people who are freelancing for them, if they worked for any company in the world, they would have been fired for one of the things that they did, as opposed to all of the things that they were doing to these models. And basically, it took about a year. We came up with this agreement, and people have been following it ever since. And after that agreement came out, then I worked with Condé Nast to also work on the Condé Nast Charter. And basically the one thing that I was able to achieve with that was that the starting age of models would now be 18. So that just literally that like the flood of models from Eastern Europe and Russia and all of that would just stop because it was really turning into a hamster wheel. And then basically after I did that, I decided I needed a break. So once I got that done,
This is it.
All right, guys.
yeah, so once I did that, I definitely needed a break from all of that. So I took a year off and then COVID happened. So here, that leaves me to where I am presently.
So tell me, like, you know, where you are now. So you've taken some time off. Oh, and hey, everybody, anyone who's just coming on, if you can. Thank you. So given where you are now, you're taking some time off. What do you think is next for you?
I don't know what's next, but I do. The one thing I've kind of learned very recently, because there are quite a few models in the business, like high profile girls that are out there kind of taking that same mantle, because it seems that one of the things that has not changed, even though the behaviors towards people have changed, one of the things that has not changed is really the pressure that people are still putting models under to maintain particular weights or to make them feel bad about embracing their own bodies. And one of the things that has changed in the last 2 years is the body positivity movement has just completely changed the game. So there is no real standard. You know, before, you know, there was a standard size and a standard height, and now that's kind of changed. So the size range has changed, the age range has changed, which is positive. But for the girls who still are, you know, maintain the general high fashion work, they're still being pressured to do things or to be made to feel bad for just, you know, being the size they are. And at some point when you're 40 years old or you're 28, you know, your body is going to be what it's going to be. You can't really do, there's only so much you can do to be healthy, you know, and not be blamed for it or not lose work over it. So one in particular is Karen Nelson, and she's really taken the mantle now, and she's doing all of these forums on Instagram. And she did one last week, which was really eye-opening for me, because I just went on to listen, and it turned out the one thing that was kind of one of the bad things about the business is still going on. But I do think she's going to actually make some change. It's going to be a long road, but so I wasn't really thinking of ever getting back into that part of it again, but there's a few people out there doing that, so I probably am going to relend my voice to them for a while, because still when things go wrong, everyone knows I'm out of it, but they still write me, because if I just go on Instagram and warn people, like, watch out, everyone gets in line, and I feel, you know, but at the moment, yeah, so it looks like I'm going to be, dragged in is not the right word for that, but I will probably lend my voice to that for a little while longer, because I think they're making a lot of headway, and I'd like to see that. I'd like to see that finish.
What? Okay, so we are starting to get some chat, and again, mute yourself. Okay, so we're starting to get some questions in the chat, but I do have one more question for you, James. What is it like knowing that you can get on Instagram at any time and call somebody out and shift the industry in a direction? What does that feel like for you?
I had no idea what that would feel like, and I would just say, you know, like, no, I wouldn't say warn anyone, just not be careful what you say, but just know or think, because that's the other thing. The after effect of that was now I have to very carefully think about what I say, and before I could say anything. I mean, I'm still pretty unfiltered as far as the things I say go, but I have to think more. That was really just like an act of passion. I was so angry the day that happened, and I couldn't believe that those two people who'd been abusing girls for years had done that. And I was at Stella McCartney that day, and they have terrible, terrible internet. So literally, for when I heard that it happened and the girls started to text me and call me, and you know, my first thing was to just get them out of that room. But then I was so angry that I'd made this post, and I literally had to go down the street to actually send the post. So I did it, and then I sent it out, and then I went back to work and didn't think about it. And then 3 hours later, the PR director of Stella came down and said, like, you have to go to Pino's office now. And I thought,
Uh-oh.
what I do? And he's just like, he's like, don't you know what happened? I'm like, no. He's like, your Instagram thing just like went around the world, and it's like, it is causing a huge nightmare for everyone. And I was like, oh. And so, but then I was like, yeah. And but what I didn't realize also, because my internet was on this company system, when I actually went back to my room, I had 1,300 emails from girls. I had like hundreds of messages from journalists. My phone started blowing up, and people were like, you have to, you know, I want to know this, I want to know that. If you don't tell me now, I'm just going to print something and say you said it. And like, that got really, like, it actually got really overwhelming. And just, you know, I mean, literally people from New York to Singapore, like just everyone calling me like, I want something now, like, why did, you know, and that really exploded out of control. And so the good thing was that the PR department of Kering actually helped me navigate that, because they're like, tell us who's calling you, tell us who's emailing you, we will, you know. And then I just wasn't ready for all the stories from most of the girls and guys I'd worked with. Like, that was just, those were devastating stories. I wasn't ready to process any of that. And they kept coming, like, you know, first day I had 1,300 messages, then it was 300, then it was 500, then it was another 700. Like, they just never stopped. And I read all of them, and it was really, they were just, I ended up having to also get help, because I wasn't, like, everyone was like, you know, I feel comfortable telling this, but you can never tell another soul. And then, like, one of the worst things I ever heard, and I read thousands of them, and they were all people I knew. So now half the time I look at a cover and I know the story behind that cover, and like, it just, the whole thing just really, I wasn't ready for it at all. And you can't prepare for those things. So like, it does, regardless of whether it's in fashion, whether it's people who call out, you know, race, and, you know, like, there is no preparing you for when something like that explodes. And you know, and then I sort of just, it was news and interviews and TV, like, it just, I wasn't ready. And it really split the industry in half. I mean, the entire modeling industry was behind me, and then half of the people that employed me, or just a lot of the people who were now the abuse, you know, they all like really turned against me. And so much bad stuff came about, and people just tried to discount me all day. And I mean, ultimately, I didn't care at my core, but it's still, I was not ready for what that was going to feel like. So that was
a lot of courage.
You know, at the time, it didn't feel like courage. It was really, I was just so angry. I didn't know what I was doing. So it was just like, here we go. And my thing, you know, basically my warning was like, you F with me, I'm gonna come back for you. And they did. And I was just, that for me was really like stepping over the line in the sand. So I really reacted out of just, it was a knee-jerk thing. And then when that all exploded, it was really, I felt like for a year, because it went on for like a year and a half, until, because there were lawsuits, there were all these, and then until we got the Kering deal done, I literally felt like I was just watching that entire year outside of my body, watching this happen to me and not someone else. It was really the most bizarre. I wouldn't not do it again. I would do it again. I think if something similar happened, I equally wouldn't be as prepared. You know, it's just one of those things that, like, you know, it happened. But yeah, it took me a long time to get over that. That was also like a really difficult thing to just sort of like wrap my head around. And that was why I was just like, now I got to step away from this, because like I got it all done and good things happen. So I just, now I need some time to like yeah. So
I mean, obviously there were lots of traumas that individual models were suffering with in the industry, but then they were sharing that with you. So you were also shouldering that trauma in addition to being attacked by some of the members of the industry that you were calling out, and rightly so,
And
right?
then, yeah, and then, then within that year, the whole photographer
Mhm.
piece broke in the New York Times. So then that was Bruce Weber and Mario Testino and, all of that. And then there was the second round in the Boston Globe, which was the next round of photographers and stylists and then a lot of the industry blamed me for planting those stories, which were not. Those stories were actually developed and with those journalists by models who now felt emboldened to say, look, this is true, and like this isn't enough. And now, but everyone thought that it was me. So I just kind of got lumped into the whole thing
You
at
became
once.
a scapegoat.
Yeah, so it was yeah, it was quite like I mean, almost it feels like it never happened now, but sometimes I'm like, whoa, like I can't say it felt like anything because it really literally felt like it was happening around me, as opposed to I got in, and until we started the charter, that's really when I felt like, okay, now like this is happening and we're getting something done. And that was my only goal, was to make sure that that did not fall apart, which it almost did 2 or 3 times while it was happening. So in the end, I was really happy that it happened. And the business was really happy that it happened. So that I felt really proud of that when it was done.
Yeah, I mean, you really were able to take a really tough situation and turn it into something good that, yeah, the whole industry embraces now, and it's moved the whole thing forward in such a positive way. So, I mean,
Yeah, and I thought that would take years. When I spoke at the BOF, I really thought my goal was to plant that seed, and I thought it would take 5 or 10 years. And then like one Instagram tweet, it happened.
oh my gosh, the power of Instagram.
Yeah, that is, yeah, for better or for worse, that was really,
Wow. Well, let's turn to some questions. We have a couple of them here. One is the first one's from Alyssa Diltz, and Alyssa is actually the casting director for Omaha Fashion Week. And she owns a modeling agency here in Omaha called Develop Model Management. And we've been working together for a long time. So she's asking, how do you, as a casting director, besides the behind the scenes work that you are doing and have done, but how do you cast models if a designer only wants to book one size or type of model?
fortunately for me, people hired me because basically I had a signature. So you knew if I was coming in, this is what, they were going to be very well-rounded and diverse casts. And the only thing that's different now in relation to that question is really, even though I've only been out of the business for 2 years, the whole body positivity thing happened when I left. So that was, that was just the beginning of like, that was right when Ford decided like, no more plus size. Everyone was like getting rid of their plus size divisions. And then Mina White at IMG decided like, this was a business and this wasn't going away. And she started, then she started the Curve division at IMG, which has pretty much every, she took all those girls from Ford and turned them into household names. So it was really, that all happened right after I left. So I would, it's hard. It's interesting because now the other thing is when I watch shows, my eye has changed so much that 2 years ago, I could watch a show one way and say this is a casting. Now, when I don't really see diversity on all the levels, it's kind of weird. And you do, people are starting to call out designers for not being body diverse. Mm-hmm. So that's another thing that's in its infancy right now. So yeah, but I would, at the time when I was casting, there was every client knew that hired me what I was coming. If you weren't doing that, then I wasn't going to work with you. And that was the discussion like right before you hired me, that like, here's what I do, here's what I think is going to be right for you, but this is what it's going to involve because the world is global and you can't not represent, period, because everyone needs to see themselves. And that was the conversation that was happening before I left the business. But yeah, if you weren't going to do that, then I wouldn't work for you. So that was.
Your clients kind of self-selected, so you weren't locked into working with clients that only wanted one type of model, just by virtue of the reputation.
Yeah, no, and again, people hired me from my, my point of view. So yeah, they hired me for definitely, I wouldn't say a particular thing, but they hired me because I was like, I was very diverse. I mean, like I said, I worked with everyone from Tom Ford to Rick Owens, so there wasn't any kind of, and they're two very different, and then Carolina Herrera in the middle. So those are three completely different realms of, and I think the same thing, I could go very easily from like any of those mindsets. And that is one of the things that set me apart from other people.
Yeah. Okay, great. And so then another thing, let's see. Alyssa also was wondering, can you explain the process of what a casting director does?
Yes. So a casting director, excuse me, is hired by a designer, and basically, excuse me, basically what they have you do is pre-screen a cast for them. So, and again, I can put it in the context of, with my clients, like Tom Ford was just looking for rich, sexy, powerful, confident, like, a lot of designers are happy to use models that can't walk. His was like, the polish had to be there. Carolina Herrera, because her client was, a woman, Park Avenue woman, those girls just had to be, whereas Tom Ford's could be like brash and sexy, hers needed to be really refined and elegant and a lot more mature in their carriage. And then Stella McCartney really wanted a girl that she thought she could go to a pub with. So that was really like kind of a fun time. Like she liked a more natural beauty. She liked freckles and red hair, like she just really liked, so each person comes to you with a different idea of what they're casting. And then basically you, as a casting director, say we're in New York, you call every agency in New York, they send you all their packages. You basically then screen through those packages and say, I want to see all of these girls. And then the way I worked was I would pick the girl, or I would screen the girls and guys that I would want to see. And then basically, if I had 8 or 9 show clients, as the model would walk in, I would already be able to say, like, this one can do every single show. This one would be perfect for Rick Owens. This one is only Stella. This one is Tom Ford, Carolina Herrera, and Peter Somm, and that's it. Where see, then you already start like, because each designer has their own character of the kind of person they like as well. So it's almost like putting people in a play. This model can play this part and that part, and that's kind of how, that is basically. But basically, once you do that, so then you make all of these. So say, I'll go back to one client. I've done a pre-casting for Carolina Herrera. She uses about 40 models. So every season she uses 40 models. I would say probably about 30 of them are models that she has relationships with. So you usually bring those models back, and then you're basically looking for 10 more in theory. So basically you probably, in the old days, when there weren't so many models in the business was small and you really, you had relationships, so the castings weren't big. But so for her to look for 10 people, I would probably have to pre-screen like 300, and then I would cut that down to like 50, and then she would see those 50 people. And again, depending on the designer, like some people, like Stella McCartney, I would almost pre-cast the whole thing before I saw her because she couldn't concentrate on go-sees. Like Tom Ford only ever wanted to see 15 or 20 people, and then I had other designers that would see 300. So you basically, then you set up these go-sees, they meet, they try and close, and then you make your final selection. So with Carolina Herrera, we would put 30 girls up on the board, and then we would narrow it down to that final 10, add them to the other 30, and then you have a cast, and then you schedule their fittings. And then once all of the model fittings happen, then it is your job. The show's at 10 o'clock. It's your job to make sure they're all there at 7, that hair and makeup happens, that rehearsal happens. Then basically you're just in charge of getting them to the job, on the job, and then on the runway. So it's a pretty cut and dry. And again, if you have lots of normal clients, they're pretty consistent in what they like. So it's not like millions of new girls every season, like it pretty much runs like a machine.
Cool. Well, thank you. Okay, so here's the next question. This is from Victoria. She says, thank you so much for sharing your experiences with us. You told us about the first time you whistle blew. Were you ever worried about a backlash?
No, because again, I found it so irritating and it was affecting my job. I mean, down the road, I wondered, like, is this gonna like hurt me one way or the other? But in the end, I found that every time I did, people were really happy that I did it. And a lot of people, and especially models, they were like, I can't say these things. So the fact that you say these things validates, now I can actually like go on a shoot and say, I don't feel comfortable this way, or I don't want to do this show, or, and I say it was kind of a 50-50 thing. There was definitely a group of people that like were not into and a lot of people didn't like being the subject. I mean, I've literally called out everyone from Prada to Raf Simons, Gucci, so I called out everyone, and usually called them out in newspapers. So it wasn't like, and then it became this thing, like every journalist was like dying to know what I thought. So when I, and it wasn't just for that. If there really was something going on, they would be like, well, what do you think? And I was like, well, here's the problem. And here's how we fix it. And like I said, I didn't like doing that as much as I did. And even to be quite honest, the first people I called out who did that casting, like I ruined their careers. I don't feel, they had it coming to them, and I wish I wasn't the one that did it, and I don't regret it, but still I ruined their life. But I would say I ruined their professional lives, but I didn't really do that. They actually ruined their, they bought what they got upon them. I was just the person but that weighed heavily on me. So the same thing, you do have to know if that's the thing you want to do. Down the road, I really did understand it was, that was almost, activism was turning into a full-time job. And I did start to think at some point it probably was going to ruin my day job. But at that point, I didn't care anymore because it was really moving along in a positive way. But ultimately, my clients, they liked the press. They didn't fire me. They didn't, I didn't lose jobs over it ultimately. So it probably kept some people that I might have wanted to work from hiring me, but it didn't bother me one way or the other. But it definitely was risk. And there was a point where I did have to consider, like, do I just move forward and like, burn all my bridges, then I finally decided that was the way to go, because I didn't want to stay in a business that was, because it started to make me not like my job, and I wanted the job that I always had. So, and I wanted everyone else to experience that. So.
Okay, and so someone else is asking, what do you think of Diet Prada?
I like, I like it. I don't, and to be quite honest, yes, they do call out some people. I mean, and they've also morphed into something different. I mean, they really started out calling out knockoffs, which actually, and the way they did it was very humorous, and they did it with a good sense of humor, and they knew what they were talking, like considering how young they were, they really knew their references, and I was very impressed. And then, then they kind of, same thing, got into activism. I do think sometimes they overstep their boundaries, but because the one thing I've also learned, and it's the same thing, like I would never now say anything about or anyone unless I am 100% bulletproof on my information, because if you really do say the wrong thing about a person, and you don't have all the information, you really could cause more trouble than help. And I do feel like occasionally they fall into that, but not very much. And like I said, during, literally during Black Lives Matter and now Stop Asian Hate. I love when they go in that direction too, because they are powerful enough to actually make things happen. So, but yes, I would say they're more good than bad. So that's.
Okay, and what someone else is asking, what can brands, designers, and agencies do to continue in the right direction after the hype of progress begins to fade?
Well, I'm not. I think as far as diversity on the runway goes, we're good now. I don't think that will fade, because the one other interesting thing in the last 5 years is that Gen Z has actually come into the business, and 5 years ago they were all teenagers. And the difference between Gen Z and any other generation prior is they really do want to be seen and represented, and if they are not, they will go somewhere and find it. And that is why I also think we have Hood by Air and Telfar, and especially in young New York, you had all of these people who really just totally went in a whole nother casting direction, because they wanted to see their friends, they wanted to see short people, they wanted to see pregnant people, they wanted to see big girls, and that generation really started the whole diversity conversation. So I don't think, I'd be very surprised if we ever get to a point again where diversity is going to be an issue on the runway. And I do think, because we live in a global world, and with people like Diet Prada, if someone had a show tomorrow and it was an all-white cast, they would be on that in 10 seconds, and that is where they do good. So I don't think, where we need the help now is behind the scenes. Most design staffs do not have people of color on their design staffs. They don't have presidents, they don't have vice presidents, they don't have merchandisers, and a lot of companies have really taken that into account, especially during the whole George Floyd episode, where people really, where a lot of their employees were allowed to talk in these forums and say how they felt and what they thought. And but that's the same thing, long road. But I think the diversity issue now is really behind the scenes more than on the runway, which we need both, because if it's just on the runway, then that just feels like
tokenism.
Yeah, and that's, it's too light. It's not, that's yeah, that is really where the next phase of that has to come in. And I'll be curious to see where the next several years of that, and the good thing is now there, also because of this, within the last year, there are so many creatives now, photographers, stylists, new editors that are all people of color, and working in Europe, and where that has really exploded in the last year. So hopefully, and that has not been an inroad that anyone of color, literally, we now have 4 Black editors in chiefs at Condé Nast. We have, like Paris Vogue has never had a Black freelancer, and now they have 4 of them. So that's, Edward Enninful's Vogue has really changed the game. To me, it actually looks more American than American Vogue. It's so diverse, but I think we're just in the beginning of all of that. And again, now for me, that is up to Gen Z to, and they will, because they will.
Yeah, they've already proven it. Great. And so, okay, here's another question. This is from Hannah Johnson. Wow, that is some heavy stuff. What are some things that you do for self-care, or how do you disassociate or separate James the whistleblower from James the normal guy?
Well, that is basically what I've been doing in this last 2 years off. Literally, once the charter was done, I actually did see a therapist for a year, which was super helpful. But as far as self-care, the other things I find super helpful are acupuncture, which really takes the pressure and heat off a lot of things. And recently I've started doing sacrocranial therapy, which is probably one of the most mind-opening and relaxing and incredible things I have done. It's like my favorite thing that I'm doing right now. But I definitely spent a year or two, like I said, I just literally had to walk away from the entire business and put it to bed and not deal with it or anyone in it for a year, just to separate myself from it. So that was the first step. And it did take me over a year to just, and at that point I'd cut my tie, like I wasn't reading magazines or women's wear or BOF. I kept in touch with a couple of my agent friends. I stopped following every model on Instagram. Like I just really all of my clients, like I literally just got rid of all of it because I didn't want any kind of daily reminder. I really had to just kind of move forward. But yeah, no, like when I look back on it now, I'm like, oh, I actually did that. But there were just some days where like, whoa, I really like, how do I get out of this?
Yeah. So you just had to purge for a while. You had to break up.
Yeah. Total breakup.
Yeah. Okay, this is from Alex Scarpello. He's one of our designers. How does the charter hold brands accountable to the standards that they've set forth?
So basically, there are a lot of standards in there. The standards work everywhere from fashion show production to shoots, and basically ultimately, it didn't work because nobody uses telephones, but there actually was a hotline that if any model was on a job that felt that they had no privacy backstage at a show, that someone was bothering them, that they didn't like the way they were treated on a shoot, that part we still have to fix because people weren't using it. They were just still coming to me or going to other people within the company. So they do have to set up an executive committee for that. But the thing it holds the most accountable is that if anyone is on one of these jobs, or if you're a stylist on a fashion show and something goes wrong or you really commit some abuse, you basically cannot work. Not only will you be fired from, so say you're working for Kering and you're working for 4 brands of Kering, you don't ever work for Kering again, or you don't work for LVMH ever again. And then it goes public that this stylist was fired for, and we at Kering and LVMH will never work with you again. So that really just put everybody in, like nobody has committed that kind of infraction, which I was really happy about. Like I said, I was just more distressed to hear that that sort of weight thing and that's a big problem, because that is really where everyone's self-esteem is rooted, and that I was really hoping that part would be repaired. But the accountability is that you can never work for those organizations again if you create an infraction.
Wow. Awesome. Okay, so this is from Haley Heinrichs. What advice would you give your 20-year-old self when you first dove into working in the industry?
I don't know that I would have given myself any advice, because the time I came into fashion was a very easy time to move around in that world, and it was a very supportive industry and not sort of non-competitive. So like if someone liked you, they hired you, and then they sent you to someone else and said work for this. So it was a kind of really nice hand washing thing. The advice I would give someone else is that the advice I was given that I actually used a lot was when you get nervous about, say, oh, I'd love to work for that person, or I'd love, and people say, well, then just go up and talk to them, like go up and ask them for a job. Like they'll either say no, but it's not like it's going to be on the cover of the New York Times tomorrow that you went to Vogue and they said no, and like those things don't happen like that. But pretty much every person I ever sort of approached or went to and said, I'd love to work for you, like it pretty much happened. And when it didn't, I really now think those jobs weren't meant to be. And ultimately some of those jobs came around at a later time. But I wouldn't have changed anything that I was doing at that point, because then there was just so much opportunity that like there was almost like you didn't even know where to turn, as opposed to now where the opportunities are very segmented. So it's harder to know, where would I go first or how do I start? That is the difference between now and then. It's a lot harder road to start from the bottom and
Work your way up now.
Work your way up. You can. It's not like before. Like I said, I've had like I've been a buyer, I've been a magazine editor, I've been a fashion show producer. Like I don't think that would be as easy. It's not impossible, but it's just not as open the way it was before, because less people control a lot more of the business, whereas before it was really open business.
Yeah. Okay. Here's another one. What tips do you have for the models, men and women, for when they're feeling uncomfortable, like if they're on a job or involved in a situation that makes them feel uncomfortable? What should they do?
Well, I always, unless I've had other experience, uh, my first advice would be to call your agent and just say, like, hey, that is the other thing about the LMVH-Kering thing, is now all the jobs have to be explained before you get on them. So if there is going to be a nude, you are told before the job, so you can say, I'm fine with that, or I'm really not fine with that, and I want to choose not to do this job or be in those shots. I guess that advice before you even get uncomfortable is that really, whatever job you're on, make sure you know everything about that job. If you know other, say you have other model friends and they've worked with this person before, how was it? Like, is this person like legit? Are they nice? Is it great? Is it an easy thing? Is he tough? And how can I be better? I would try to be as educated before you go on the job. And then if you do get on a job and it's just getting hairy or uncomfortable, I would call my agent first. And then my feeling is that if the job really gets uncomfortable and the agent's not doing anything about it, then you walk off the job and maybe consider another agent, because at the end of the day, the agent is really supposed to protect you from these things. And clearly, in the way the business worked with all of this calling out, there were definitely people who turned a blind eye and just hoped nothing would happen. And then there were truly agents who had no idea, because a lot of times when something really traumatic happens to you on a shoot, you think, well, A, you sent me here, so maybe you knew, or B, this person's so important that if I, say something, that I'm going to be difficult. But my personal feeling is, down the road, it's not worth having that happen to you to have that career. There are other things, it's really not. But my first advice would be, call your agent, and hopefully the agent will either pull you from the job or just call and say, hey, you know what, like, why is his shirt off? Why is her skirt too short? Why is she outside and it's 20 degrees and she's a baby? Like, really, knowledge before the shoot. But then really, if your agent's not going to protect you on that shoot, then I just say walk off and go somewhere else, because that is their job, to make sure these things don't happen to you.
Yeah, absolutely.
I would definitely say something. That would be it. Like, what, give me a minute. I'm just going to go make a phone call, but.
Yeah, I mean, when we're doing Omaha Fashion Week, we're always encouraging the models, if something makes you uncomfortable or doesn't feel right, if you see something strange, please let one of our backstage leaders know, or text Alyssa. I mean, there's been many times we've jumped in to kind of solve issues backstage that make people feel uncomfortable, and we'd prefer to deal with that on the spot at the time than find out weeks later that something happened that should have been dealt with. So I think that's really great advice that can be applied on the local level at Omaha Fashion Week and all the way up through wherever your career ends up. Your agent should be there to protect.
Especially if these models are doing local shoots. And they're definitely, like, if you like work steady for department stores and things like that, like, it's still a network. There may be one photographer who does all this work that might not be the best, just hypothetical, but like, you also don't want to feel like you have to do what someone says you should do, because you're not going to get work, then I'd be like, then I don't want to work. But
right, yeah, you couldn't be forced into something that makes you feel uncomfortable, or you're compromising your values or whatever it is. So it's not, any career is not worth compromising yourself for, essentially. Yeah. Okay, so a few more questions. Do you have a few more minutes, James?
Yeah.
Running a little bit over, but I think these are really important questions. Let's see, has anything been particularly inspiring to you in your career or personal life lately, especially coming out of the lull of COVID? We're all so over COVID. Ugh.
Well, I think, once COVID happened, I think just because of the stages of how it, first it was manic, and then we thought it would be over by July, and then part of me like just to sort of in lockdown and like basically shut my creative brain off. So like everything turned off in the last year. And it's just now it's starting to work again just because I can't suppress it anymore. It's just the now like like I said, I don't know what's going to be next, but I know it's coming. So I guess now I'm open to that, because before I just was like, I'm not doing anything until any of this is over. And like I said, now again, people are sort of calling me and making me interesting offers. Not that I'm really ready for any of that, but I'll be curious. I'll be curious to see what comes. I'm still my feet are in the sand about like, I still have plenty of time to take off if I want. So I'm not, I would like to enjoy some more of the time.
Some of the quiet time, like maybe like your own personal lockdown, even if it's not government enforced.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I was gonna say, yeah. And I was traveling a lot before this, so I'd like to, I don't think when this is all over, I'm ready to jump on a plane again either, but just the thought of like having a little more freedom might just be enough to start with.
Yeah, so having freedom and a little bit of personal peace sounds like it's what's most inspiring to you.
Yeah, I've had enough time with myself for the last year, so I'm ready. I'm ready for a change.
Yeah. Okay, and what do you say to people who ask why did it take so long for someone to speak up? I mean, this was a rampant problem in the industry. There, all the stories that came out after you shared that Instagram post. There were so many stories. So why did it take so long for someone?
Well, because the business was so corrupt. Like, like I said, there were 6 stylists who were basically in charge of the business. So, so again, this is all hypothetical. You have one stylist and they have Chanel and they have Dior and they have Gucci and they have Balenciaga and they, and then they have 5 advertising clients, and, all you have to do is look at one of them wrong and they just blackball you. So like there was this whole threat, like it wasn't set up for anyone to ever say a thing, because basically you were disposable. So like if you, and then they were competitive within each other. So you have this stylist that has these 10 clients and this stylist that has these 10 clients, and they would get mad if a girl worked
for the opposing
client. So like if you work for them, you can't work for me. Like the whole thing just got to be a mess. And it didn't matter that one of these stylists was, sexually harassing girls all the time, because he was aligned with 3 of the most powerful art directors in the world, and they protected him. So it didn't matter if you were like, and that's the thing that upsets me now, because when I talk to these agents and they're like, oh yeah, I know that happened to her, but like, what could we do? We make $4 million a year off that person. I wasn't gonna like, and like, so that's where they would turn their eyes and just hope that something wouldn't happen. Or, I know there were several girls who smacked this person across the face and they all got blackballed. So it wasn't, and these were like top. So it didn't matter. Everyone thinks this was just happening to like little 16-year-old Russian girls and it was their first job. This was happening to like, the Christy Turlington level girls. It wasn't like, it was really,
it was the power structures in place.
It was the power structure that just couldn't allow. And then, like I said, because of what I did, and then just because of Instagram, a lot of these models felt like, well, if this stylist is going to blackball me, I'm taking you down. And that's what they did. They went on Instagram and said, this person did this to me. And that, like I said, in a way, it kind of leveled the playing field again, because it at least gave the models some power.
A voice. It gave them an opportunity to.
And unfortunately, the agents created these monsters, because it was really up to the agents to protect these models in the first place. Like back in the supermodel era, those girls never had any of those, the things that happened when in the last 10 years happened to them, and they had more control over their careers. So you would never, you just would never. Same thing, like, you just wouldn't do a thing like that to Naomi, Kate, or Christy, because you'd never work again. So, and then those girls moved on, and then they lost the next generation of models totally lost their power to these powerful fashion editors. So
Yeah. And that all happened, I mean, that era of the supermodel, I mean, that was the 90s, and it kind of started changing like around, but in the early 2000s.
in the early 2000s.
Yeah. Wow. Can you talk a little bit? We've talked a lot about female models and what they've gone through. What about male models? What are some of the things they've come across and the challenges they've had? Um, what have you seen in that area with the male models?
I mean, it's pretty much the same.
Mhm.
And again, that kind of abuse. I mean, it's hard because other than the two big photographers who were taken down, what really happens to men more is on the local level or like the California level or a lot of these male photographers that do erotic, not necessarily sex pictures, but like the sexy guy in the on the beach and who just published lots of books and that is where a lot of that abuse happens. Not that it doesn't happen in high fashion, it does, but it was more on the photography level than fashion show level. So it's also weird, these pockets of abuse were like all over the place and not collectively in one place. But
What about Alexander Wang? Do you have any thoughts on that?
It's kind of two schools. It is one, like, he definitely had a reputation for being a party guy.
Mhm.
And a lot of the behavior that happened with him happened when he was drunk. So you have to be careful when you're a kid that wants to be in that orbit and you already know. I mean, like I said, he was famous for like, handing you a glass of water and it was vodka, and is that, and that kind of stuff is just stupid. It's like the same thing as like, you can't hand someone a drink with, a chemical in it because you could kill some, but he was a serious, heavy partier. And, that's no excuse for what he did. But when people get in those groups, bad stuff is going to happen. And I do think that, sometimes, 50% of that was someone who may have gone into that knowing and thinking it's just not going to happen to me, and then it happened. And then some were just really like that was an innocent bystander that happened to. So the whole thing was wrong, and it shouldn't have happened. And to be quite honest, just even by saying he was a heavy partier, he should have been a more responsible person to know that, like, if you already have a reputation for being out there and being drunk and then these things happen, like,
Maybe don't drink anymore.
well, exactly. And and a person in that profile, like, I don't even know why you would have risked that kind of, and again, this is all in the last 5 years, he's barely, he just turned 30, he was a kid too. I'm not even justifying any of it, but it was like the whole, like, a lot of it was immaturity, a lot of it was stupidity, in the sense that, like, you are now like one of the most famous people in the country, like, you need to get your shit together or drink at home, or like, but some people are messy, I mean,
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like
it was the same. I mean, he was a messy, like, it was no secret that, when he got drunk, he talked and he said that, and that, and again, that is a bigger problem that people don't talk about in the business, is the amount of drugs that are done, especially by young fashion designers. Because again, if you're like Kim Jones and you're at Dior, there is a structure to how you work. But like, if you're like an Alexander Wang or a Jason Wu or a Takoon or any of these young designers, Brandon Maxwell, the pressure was different. And you'd come into the business, you're a darling, and like, all these other people took 20 years to get where they were. All of a sudden you have one collection, you dress Michelle Obama, and you are out there, and you are now you have the same expectations of a person who is the level of Kim Jones, and you just had your second collection out. And a lot of these designers ended up doing drugs just to keep up with the pace of while some people just had drug problems, unfortunately, with Alexander Wang, he also had the problem of being a messy person when he's on drugs. But it's a big problem
I mean, so it's probably like a self-medication thing because there is so much pressure.
Sure, there's a lot. Yep.
Life experience to handle the pressure that somebody who's been in the industry and has worked their way up over several decades would. And yeah, I mean, so like.
And then just to go back to Wang, the real flaw there was he, regardless of how messy his behavior was, he shouldn't have been using his power as a person in that place to even bring people into those rooms or to be at those parties and to have those things and then behave that way, because you were just really asking for a bomb to explode. And any of those things, if that were someone else or even someone working in his own company, he would have fired someone for that. So like, what allowed him to behave that way? And that was the root of that problem, which is unfortunate for him because I don't think he's going to recover from it.
No, I don't think so either. Does anybody have any other questions? I think I've run through all the questions in the comments. Okay. Well, I think then we're going to wrap up now. We've taken more of your time than we had planned, but we so appreciate you being here. Do you have any parting comments or pieces of advice you want to share with us?
No, just wanted to thank you guys for having me, and hopefully this wasn't boring and I didn't go on too long. So
fascinating. I mean, it was more than questions in the chat. There was a lot of comments just expressing appreciation for you sharing your story and all the work that you've done and just the personal sacrifices that you made to change the industry for the better. So I want to join the models in thanking you for doing that. We really, really appreciate it, and especially you taking time to speak to all of us tonight. Before we close, I do want to remind everybody we still have one more session tomorrow night, and this one is with Takun, who is a Nebraska native. He graduated from high school in Bellevue.
And we worked at Harper's Bazaar together.
Sorry, what was that?
We worked at Harper's Bazaar together.
Oh, perfect. Okay, well, there you go. So, so he'll be with us tomorrow night at 7 o'clock. And so we would love to see you all back for that. And again, all of these sessions are free, and we're doing this because COVID sucks and we want to do something to give back to the community. It's been a rough year. So hopefully these sessions will inspire you and kind of get you ready and excited to come back in person in August. We're really hoping to get back to doing in-person runway shows this
Yes, hopefully you'll get back on the runway soon. So
I hope so. I really hope so. I think we will. So be aware of that tomorrow night at 7. And then we're going to be doing reruns of our August season. We're going to be showing them in the shows in their entirety on Friday and Saturday night. So it'll be the first time we've shown those full shows. And then Sunday from I think 10 a.m. through 10 p.m. we have designers that are going to be taking over our Instagram, and we're going to be doing like a virtual version of Shop the Runway Sunday. So our designers will be taking 1-hour slots and sharing the things that they've been working on that they have for sale. So make sure you turn into that and support our designers as well. So thank you all so much, and hopefully we'll see you tomorrow night.
All right. Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Thanks, James.
Good luck, guys. Take care.
Bye.
Thank you.